What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. My name is Kyle. Today, July 15th, we're going to be continuing our 32-team series, just going over each team's projections. We've already covered half the league. I've already got the AFC East, the NFC East, the AFC North, and the NFC North done. So East and North are done. We're starting today with the AFC South, and we'll get as many as done as we can this week. So we're going to start with the Houston Texans in this video. We'll hop into a screen share, and then we'll just look over my projections, and I'll kind of show you guys what I'm looking at for the Texans this coming year. A lot of excitement around the Texans. And if you guys are new to, I guess if this is your first video of my projection series, I'll put in the comments, I'll put the playlist there, and you guys can check out some of the other videos. But what we do is we start with kind of reviewing what happened last year. And I think it's, pretty important to note too, that in 2022, this team 3-13 and 1, and they were gutted. Lovie Smith, Pep Hamilton, those guys are gone. In comes Nico and Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, and they take CJ Stroud. They move up and get the Anderson, the defensive end, and this team wins 10 games. They go 10-7 last year and have a really, really good rookie season for CJ Stroud and a really good season for DeMeco Ryans as his first time coaching. And if we just look at the numbers from last year, as a team, and CJ Stroud played pretty much every game. I think he missed one start and he got knocked out of a game or two, but almost 600 passing attempts, roughly 63% completion percentage here, which is pretty solid. You also have, I don't think that's right, actually. Let me, these numbers should be correlating to here. 1 second. Let's get that correlating here. There we go. Okay. So last year, 600 passing attempts, 63% completion, almost 4,600 yards, 7.73 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions as a group. Now, I was looking at the wrong column. CJ Stroud threw 500 of those attempts. Case Keenum played a little bit. Davis Mills played a little bit. Those guys were fine. They were just okay. But the real juice here is with CJ Stroud. He had a fantastic rookie campaign. I think he's like 4th or 5th in MVP odds coming into this season. He doesn't run the ball a lot. 39 rushing attempts, 167 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Not that he can't do it. I'd like to see him do it a little bit more. But essentially just a really one of the best rookie quarterback seasons we've seen in quite some time here. So I think we all feel really good about CJ Stroud. He's a top 5 upside quarterback, probably top 10 lock quarterback there. So pretty good season. We'll see if he can improve on some things. He did, throw for 4,100 yards, 8.23 yards per attempt all by himself, and 23 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. So great ratio there. If we look at the running game last year, it was actually just okay. It didn't really improve all that much from Lovie Smith and Pep Hamilton to the new regime, but they did run the ball a little bit more, 444 rushing attempts, about 1,647 yards, 10 touchdowns, a couple fumbles, basically the same yards per carry as it was in 2022. The offensive line really struggled to stay healthy at the beginning of the year, and they kind of got healthier as the year went on. So we did see them run the ball better as the team got closer to the playoffs. We saw Devin Singletary take over. Dameon Pierce wasn't playing great. He gets injured. Devin Singletary kind of just takes over, and they let him be the main guy. But overall, it was an okay running game. I think there's plenty of room for improvement there. So as good as the Texans were last year, I think there's a good chance for them to improve efficiency-wise as a running team. And then, 1,036 plays. That's the most the Texans have ran in the last handful of seasons. So I like the pacing. Roughly 600 passing attempts, so over 400 rushing attempts. That's a good balance here. Almost a 60% run pass ratio, and 6,200 yards, which is the most they've had since the Bill O'Brien, Romeo Crennel, Tim Kelly era. So pretty solid season in 2023. Without further ado, though, let's look at the projections. And what I do is we start with the quarterback. Now I'm projecting CJ Stroud to play 15, 16 games here. I did give Davis Mills 40 passing attempts, but it's pretty much all CJ Stroud. So I have him at 540 passing attempts, about 66.67% completion percentage, so 2 out of every 3, 4,300 yards, 28 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and 8.05 yards per attempt. So just comparing it to last year, I see him taking a step forward in the completion percentage. I see his yards growing, but I have his yards per attempt coming down just a little bit. He was at 8.23 last year. I got him at 8.05. Getting Nico and Dell going in the deep ball game, and now Stephon Diggs, especially just adding Stephon Diggs. We saw what Josh Allen was able to do with getting a player like him that can get open at will. So I think we see those numbers all increase. A little bit of touchdown upside there. Interceptions will probably go up a little bit as he's getting a little bit more risky and feeling himself. Now, I mentioned it earlier. I wish he would run the ball more. I got him at 45 rushing attempts, 195 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He still has a good nose for the end zone, but he doesn't like to scramble as much as I'm hoping for like a top 5 quarterback upside. But either way, I have him pretty much improving on all of his numbers from 2023. So he's looking like a really strong target in fantasy football drafts this year. He's kind of like QB 6 or 7 off the board. And I know I might get some heat for this, but he comes out as my QB 11 in my fantasy projections, which is not terrible. I think he's a little bit being overdrafted right now. I'm a little bit nervous on his rushing upside. I think he's got everything you're looking for from a passing standpoint, but if he's under 200 rushing yards and just a couple touchdowns, man, it's not going to be what can put him in the top 5. He would have to have, 35, 38 passing touchdowns to offset the rushing downside. So for me, I think he's more of a top 10 quarterback. I have 10 guys ahead of him, but 1 or 2 or 3 of these guys are going to move down and get hurt or have bad seasons. So realistically, I think he's more like QB 7, 8, 9 range. But still, you're trusting CJ Stroud every week. We like the Texans offense. I think he's very dependable. And I usually draft him when he slides, especially in best ball drafts. You can get him catching on a slide every now and then, and you can tack him with Nico or Dell or Stephon Diggs, whatever you need. So draft CJ Stroud. I think I mentioned again, he was like 4th or 5th in MVP odds this year, which is pretty cool for a second-year player. But let's talk about this running game next. The running backs here: Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, Dare Ogunbowale, Jawar Jordan, the rookie, and Andrew Beck, the fullback. Obviously, they brought in Joe Mixon. They actually paid him too, which I thought was interesting. So he's there for a little bit. I think he's the clear lead back in this offense. There have been talks about Dameon Pierce getting healthier and stronger and learning the playbook and getting better. So I do expect Dameon Pierce to be the clear-cut number 2 running back. But this is Joe Mixon's backfield. I have Joe Mixon at 245 rushing attempts, just over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, about 39 receptions on 45 targets, and 270 yards. And I mean, last year, they gave Devin Singletary 216 rushing attempts. They also gave Dameon Pierce 145. So between the two, we're talking 361 carries. And I kind of have something similar for this year, just a little bit more stronger on the starting running back side here, assuming Joe Mixon stays healthy. So I think Mixon's fine as your running back too. I do worry, that this team's going to be a heavy passing team when they get near the red zone too. That could be it. And the offensive line, again, it took a while for them to get going last year, but they finally figured it out. And I think, going from Mixon, from Devin Singletary, it should be an upgrade for the team. And I guess a little bit more dependable and, passing down situations and third down work and goal line work. I think Mixon's a better back at this point of their career. So I think Mixon, a strong play at running back 2 for you this year. He could be a top 10, top 12 running back by the end of the year. If he stays healthy and they're giving him, the bell cow workload and, 10, 12 touchdowns, something like that, we could see a top 10, top 12 Mixon season. But don't sleep on Dameon Pierce. If something does happen to Joe Mixon, we're talking about him on the waiver wire for sure. I think he's still a good back. Last year, man, the first month of the year, they're playing with their backup offensive lineman basically. And, he didn't really have a lot of room. He got a few touchdowns. He's still a really good player in my book. I think he struggled to learn the zone running scheme just a tad, but I'm still thinking he's a quality backup if anything happens to Mixon. Ogunbowale's there in case they need a receiving down backup, and then we'll keep an eye on Jawar Jordan, in training camp to see if he's a rookie worth monitoring. But to me, it's showing up. It's pretty much all Joe Mixon. If I just look and see my rankings here, I got Mixon as RB17, and kind of the same thing I said with Stroud. I have 16 running backs ahead of him, but 1, 2, 3, 4 of these guys get hurt or don't have a great season. Mixon moves up all of a sudden to the top 10 or 12. So pretty solid running back, and I think he's got a little bit of extra juice here to use with the Texans. So I like Mixon. Let's talk about the receivers, which is, to me, the most exciting part for fantasy. I mentioned I don't love CJ Stroud's value for where you got to draft him. I'm fine with Mixon's value as an RB2 cost, but getting these receivers right, I think, is going to be a huge part to fantasy football this year. So Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1. I have Diggs at the number 2 and Tank Dell at the number 3. Hopefully all 3 of these guys can stay healthy, but especially in best ball drafts. Nico Collins costs a 2nd-round pick. Stephon Diggs is a 3rd-round pick, and Tank Dell's a late 3rd, 4th-round pick. There's no way all 3 of these guys are going to pay off at that ADP. 1 or 2 of these guys will leave us disappointed. So I'm struggling, to figure out which one that will be. I think the safest bet is to go with Nico Collins, who I think is he's kind of like a new version of Mike Evans. That's kind of how I think of Nico. And last year, Nico was fantastic. 80 catches on just 109 targets, almost 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. I mean, we're talking some pretty serious numbers here. And I mean, 16.2 yards per catch is pretty wild. That was up from 13 the year before. I've got Nico leading the team in targets with 123. 82 catches. I have his yards down a little bit, 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. So I might be off on the yards here. He could be back in the 1,200s, 1,300 range, which wouldn't surprise me. But just with the competition added from Stephon Diggs, I think that's going to take away some opportunities, and it's not going to allow him to have, a huge step forward in his second year with CJ Stroud. So Diggs is tough. We've seen signs of Diggs slowing down over the last couple of years with Josh Allen. They paid a lot to get him, draft capital and whatnot. And I think it's only a 1-year deal. So I'm not sure how I feel on Stephon Diggs. I think for fantasy, like Nico Collins can be your wide receiver 1 if you need him to be. He's better as a number 2. I'm unsure on Diggs. I think he's more of like a wide receiver 2-3 tweener, PPR leagues. I think that's where you want him. But I got him at 71 catches, 110 targets, 900 yards and 6 touchdowns, which if we do the numbers, it doesn't come out to a great fantasy season. And I struggle taking him round 3. I think for him to be the number 1 receiver on this team and just, continue putting up the numbers that he did in Buffalo, I can't see it because he didn't really have a lot of target competition in Buffalo. And, he's got to come in and learn a new offense, and just Nico and Tank Dell, I think, are going to be a presence as well. So I like Diggs, but he's more of a wide receiver 3 flex, in my opinion. I could be wrong, though. I could be very wrong on that. Tank Dell is another guy that I'm struggling with because he's a smaller receiver coming off a pretty bad broken leg. And I have him at 63 catches, 102 targets, 905 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He's still going to be a bit of a vertical threat slot player for them. Kind of some gadgety type plays to get the ball in his hands in space. And, I wonder if he's going to be able to hold up with his size. Now, the one thing that I do think is nice is, getting Stephon Diggs means he doesn't have to put a lot on his plate. You can continue to get him the ball 4, 5, 6 times per game, keep him healthy for the year. So in the end, I think all 3 Texans receivers are going to have value. But it just really depends on where you get to click on them in your drafts. In best ball leagues, I think they're a bit rich. I do take more Nico. If I'm taking any of these 3 guys, it's more Nico than anything. But yeah, I'm really struggling with this, and I'm just curious what you guys think in the comments. I do have Nico Collins here as wide receiver 16. We got to go down a little far to find these guys here. I got Diggs and Tank Dell at wide receiver 38 and 39. So again, I could be totally wrong, and maybe Diggs has 140 targets this year, and he's the leading guy, and he has a renaissance season. I could be wrong, but I think for where those guys are being drafted, I'm taking Deebo Samuel instead of Stephon Diggs. I'm taking Devonta Smith. I like Christian Kirk. I like George Pickens over Tank Dell. I like DJ Moore over Stephon Diggs. There's just, I think, more clear situations that I like betting on where those guys are being drafted right now. But it's a great group. The backups here, Noah Brown, John Mechie, Robert Woods. We'll talk about those guys if they ever come up on the waiver wire if needed. But I'm kind of interested in John Mechie being a full year removed from his health injuries. I think he had, was it lymphoma? I can't remember. It was some kind of cancer. But it sounds like he's doing really well in OTAs and minicamp, and he looks like a brand new player. So keep an eye on Mechie. And otherwise, I don't know. I'm drafting Nico Collins. You guys, I don't know what you guys think about Dell, Diggs. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But we'll finish up with tight ends here. It's Dalton Schultz pretty easily here. 56 receptions, 80 targets, 615 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Last year, 59 catches, 88 targets, 635 yards, 5 TDs. I'm kind of projecting more of the same. And if anything, Dalton Schultz is kind of the biggest loser, I think. Adding Stephon Diggs, a guy that's going to be operating in the middle of the field in a lot of short area, 8 to 10 yard range targets, that's going to hurt Dalton Schultz. So I don't know if I view Dalton Schultz as a top 10 must start tight end. I think he's an ideal tight end too for best ball leagues. For redraft, it's fine if you miss out on some of the guys that we like this year at tight end. You can grab Dalton Schultz, and I think he'll be just fine. But I don't see a breakout top 5 season out of the tight end here, unless one of the other guys gets hurt. We'll keep an eye on Cade Stover, who they drafted out of Ohio State. I think he's an interesting guy that could be the starter in a year or two once Schultz is out of his contract. But we'll keep an eye on Stover there. And then Brevin Jordan and Tegan Quitoriano are both there as well. So there you have it. Let's finish up with the recap here, 2024 recap here. I do have I got Dalton Schultz at tight end 15, which I think is fine. You know, I do click him in best ball drafts because I think he's just a good quality value at tight end 2 for me. Wide receiver, again, I mentioned Nico Collins, wide receiver 16. Wouldn't be surprised if he's another top 10 receiver again this year. And then you have to scroll down a little bit to find Diggs and Dell, who I almost need to pick and choose. Like, I almost need to pick and choose one that I think is going to win. Because I think there could be 2 receivers that win for you based on where you draft them. I think Nico's the safest bet of the 3, but I'm thinking Stephon Diggs should probably be ranked more in like the wide receiver, like, you know, in the Chris Godwin, Cooper, Jaden Reed range, where he's a solid, dependable wide receiver 3. So I think Dell is more of the very boom bust, a better best ball kind of player, whereas Diggs has more consistency week to week. Running backs, again, I got Joe Mixon at RB17. You know, Dameon Pierce is kind of far down the list, but he would be the primary backup if something happens to Mixon. And we got CJ Stroud here at QB11. I don't think he's got top 5 upside unless he really does, you know, make a case for MVP and ends up throwing 35 touchdowns and like 4,500 yards. But I'm betting against those numbers. I think, again, I should have pulled it up and looked at it, but if you look at the top 5 quarterbacks every year in fantasy football, they're running the ball. You know, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. You know, these guys add a lot of value in the rushing game. And until I see that from CJ Stroud, I'm going to continue to bet on the under for his rushing fantasy. So we'll see. I'm super excited about Houston. I think they are the favorites to win the AFC South. I think Jacksonville's got to run for their money. And if Anthony Richardson stays healthy, the Colts will be right there. Tennessee, I mean, if they get their offense straightened out, they could be a fun team to be a sleeper there. But otherwise, I think the Texans are in very good shape this year. I'm hoping for more success for CJ Stroud in this young offense as well as D'Amico Ryan. So it's a fun team. Let me know what you guys think. Are the Texans going to win the South? Are you drafting? Let me know who you're drafting on the receivers here, because I'm kind of at a loss. But either way, thank you guys so much for your time. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.